Our guest today is Danny Matranga. Danny is a personal trainer, online coach, and host of the Dynamic Dialogue podcast. He has had the privilege of working with hundreds of clients and traveling all over the country to learn from the best experts in the fields of strength, conditioning, nutrition, and more. In this episode, Danny and I are chatting about common pitfalls we see with clients when it comes to fat loss and body composition goals, specifically in regards to the importance of behavior change and habit formation, and why it may be in your best interest to stop focusing on the minor details and get the major rocks in place first. We also dive into Danny's opinion on fast versus slow fat loss, pre and post workout nutrition tips, supplements, and lots more. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Danny Matranga. All right, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I'm here with Danny Matranga. What's up, Danny? How are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited you're here. Excited to chat about a few different topics within nutrition, training, and hopefully some lifestyle things as well. Do you want to tell our listeners kind of, how you got into the fitness and nutrition industry and your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I have been in the space now for almost 10 years. This is going to be 10 years next year. I started working as a personal trainer when I went to college for kinesiology. That was kind of how I put food on the table for myself when I was going to school, because it was a really, logical choice as far as I can kind of position these clients around my classes. I don't have to work in a shift. A lot of the pitfalls that trainers hate about, I have 2 clients here, 2 clients here, and then 2 clients at the end of the day, that worked perfectly for me when I first got started. And so I trained my whole way through my undergraduate degree in kinesiology and found that, I really love this. I love applying this stuff. I love working with people. And when I wrapped up my degree, I really wanted to pursue entrepreneurship. And so I got into content creation, trying to build a brand online in the fitness space to the best of my ability. Eventually got into online coaching, and 5, 6, 7 years later, I am where I am. My story isn't too crazy, but it's been something that I've been committed to since I turned 18 and went away to school. So it's been my life's work because it's the only work I've done in my life.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. And so you start off training people in person. Do you still train people in person, or is it more so online?
I do. I still train quite a few people in person. I really enjoy it. I train a ton of clients online. I actually just launched an online coaching company to help with some of the overflow there. I've been fortunate enough to have quite a bit of traffic in my online coaching business, but I'm very committed to the craft of actually working with clients, engaging with them one-on-one. I find it to be one of the more enjoyable ways to interface with people who are on their fitness journey. Wherever they are, it's really cool to be hands-on. And so I'm not to a point where I've given that up entirely. So I still do see some people in person with the work that I'm doing online.
Gotcha. That's cool. And I guess my first question, this kind of ties into it. So in terms of like the clients that you work with, is there any particular type of client that you work with? Like maybe, not just males versus females, but, lifestyle clients versus, athletes, any
Totally.
particular?
Yeah. So it's all over the spectrum, really. And I would say if you were looking for the demographic that I train the most of, or the goal, I would say it's just general population, lifestyle, people who want to enhance their fitness, maybe lose a little bit of body fat. I do train some athletes. I train some people who bodybuild. I train some people who do powerlifting. But the majority of the people that I work with would be classifiable as Gen Pop. And I would say their age ranges from late 20s to late 50s. And usually the primary goals are body composition change, behavior change, getting routines established. So I think lifestyle is a great way to describe it.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I work with a lot of, I would say, lifestyle clients as well. But a few, athletes mixed in there, and I really enjoy it too. I work mostly online as well. But yeah, it's fun. And with the technology these days, it's just like, I feel like it's different, right? If you tried to be an online coach, like even just, 5 years ago, it's a whole different ball game.
It is. a medium that I think is becoming easier and easier as more people like you and I kind of work out the kinks, because it's been around for a while. I remember when I first got into coaching online like 5 or 6 years ago, I was like, what do I do? How do I do this? Like, I have Google Drive, I guess, there was like a few things, there were a few apps at the time. Now there's a lot of ways to do it. And I found that online coaching is, easier than it's ever been for me. I get better as I go, but one of the things that helps me continue to stay on it is I love just being able to work with people in person. I feel like it keeps me that much more in touch, but you're totally right. It's gotten easier.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with like COVID and everything moving online. Did that affect your business at all? I'm just curious.
No, it's a wonderful question. So because some of the clients I work with in person are so dedicated to that level of communication, or that's the communication they're most receptive to, moving to PDF or even like PDF with supplemental videos wasn't going to be effective. Like, I couldn't just be like, hey, you're fully online, because a lot of them were really thriving with that one-on-one connection. So one of the things I did for a little while was Zoom. And I would have clients set up 2 cameras, one on the front, one on the side, and, in their workout space. And I would do a session with them, not much differently from the video that we have right now, where, they can see me and I can see them and guide them through the movements. And so that was one of the ways I pivoted during COVID. And then, of course, I'm sure you ran into this with the clients that you worked with online. Depending on where they were, depending on the equipment they did or didn't have access to, you were probably writing programs for people who had full gyms and people that had like water bottles and kitchen chairs. And so those things independently made COVID kind of hard, just having to manage an in-person and an online business, but it definitely made me a much better coach.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. It just, like, I learned so much from just having to do that, right? Having to shift programming to, like you said, using wine bottles and dogs and cats and things as weights, and really, diving a little bit more into like the training side of things. That was something that really helped me develop during that time as well. So cool. So I do have a few questions just that I want to kind of go through in terms of some common questions that I always get, as a coach, and that I always work with clients through different scenarios and things like that. So the first one, and I feel like this has been kind of a hot topic lately, at least from what I've seen, is kind of your opinion and experience with fat loss from a fast versus a slow approach. Obviously there's in between there, but what's your experience with that and your experience working with clients in that regard?
No, I think it's a great question. And I do think it's always important whenever you're approaching anything in fitness, whether it's fat loss or muscle gain, strength gain, some combination of all three, to individualize the approach as much as possible. I think for some individuals, rapid fat loss might be better. For example, if you're somebody who has quite a bit of weight to lose, if you're somebody who's showing the negative metabolic impacts of obesity, there are situations where I might say, hey, faster weight loss here is probably going to get you to a healthier baseline than if we're super, super conservative. But for most individuals, I find with the lifestyle constraints we have, how busy we are, especially now with people wanting to be more social, get out and do the things they didn't do for 2 years, a more reasonable approach to fat loss tends to be slower, I find, with a longer runway, and really making sure that people acknowledge if we only lose a pound a week, that's 50 pounds a year. Or if we can lose 2 pounds a week, that's 100 pounds a year. So let's try to play this long game. It gives us more room for error. And I've found with the way people tend to behave, a longer approach or trying to tailor the fat loss program in such a way that it's not rushed is almost always better.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. I would say too, I definitely agree with that. I think, do you feel like there's a component of experience as well that comes along with it? Like the more experienced you are in maybe tracking macros and training and things like that, the more I guess you can get away with the faster approach to fat loss versus someone who is just has never tracked before, is just still, new to that. They need more of the behavior change and the that side of things.
Absolutely. So I think the more experience you have with dieting, or the more experience you have with counting your macros and calories and really understanding the underpinnings of what's driving body composition change, the more you're in the driver's seat. And if you've done it long enough that you really have it down, you can lose weight pretty quickly and pretty darn safely. I find for people who aren't as experienced, a lot of the methods that they use to achieve rapid weight loss aren't particularly safe, like crash dieting, completely removing entire food groups and for, weeks and months at a time, and then going on huge binges where they gain all the weight back. These are behaviors that I don't want to sound pretentious, but you almost earn the right to diet quickly by understanding what's going on. And if you don't understand what's going on, aiming for really rapid fat loss can almost make things more challenging. And so I think the longer you've done it, the easier it is. But when you're first getting started, to your point, small lifestyle changes can be really valuable. So instead of being like, I know counting macros is extremely effective. Counting calories is extremely effective. For some people, it's really daunting. So maybe we start with, I want you to try to get 4 servings of protein a day. I want you to have vegetables on your plate with every meal. And I want you to try to drink half your body weight in ounces of water. Can you start with that for a week? Give people something digestible and something that's very actionable versus, I know you have zero nutritional literacy, but here are macros. Here are calories, track them perfectly in this app. And if you don't, you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve. You got to kind of get people there. And so without rambling on too much, how you approach it best should be some combination of where are you at? Where's our starting point? How much time or experience do you have with this? And trying to make sure that I don't give them so much that they crash and burn right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Do you have a particular minimum time frame that when you take a client on, you say, hey, like for me, for example, I have a minimum of 3 months that you have to commit to?
I think that's very standard, and I think that that's very reasonable. I do prefer to do things without a contract, and it's still a contract, but I still like things to be month to month. I'm actually one of the only trainers I know that doesn't sell packages. I just do session by session. My clients pay a one-time session flat rate every time they come in, but they keep coming back. And I tell them, I want you to be here because you're enjoying this and because this is working, not because we have a contract. But to your point, I think 3 months is extremely reasonable because it takes a considerable amount of time to even see change happen. And so you might as well say, hey, look, like 3 months is the minimum because, as you know, it's not until 6 to 8 weeks in that you can even get enough of these habits going to start to see progress. The first 1 to 4 weeks are just calibrating and just trying to get everything on the same page. So if you don't incentivize people to buy in for long enough to see results, they'll be like, what the heck? It's been a month. Nothing's happened. It's like, yeah, but we're right there. I think of that image of the man in the coal mine with a pickaxe and he's getting closer to the back of the coal mine and there's a diamond right behind like a small thin wall, but he turns around and walks out and he's like, this is taking too long. Yeah. I feel like weight loss is similar right when people start to get momentum, but because it's not happening fast enough, they quit. And so you do have to allow adequate time for a diet to work, for the behaviors to fall in place, and for you to do them consistently enough. And a lot of times you have to do that through failing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I love that. That kind of brings me into my next question. And this is a common, I guess, what's the word? Downfall to, when we're on a fat loss journey or body recomposition journey is the scale, right? So we know the scale can be a tool in itself and it's just that. But in terms of, daily fluctuations, weekly, monthly fluctuations, and maybe scale stalls, how do you address that with your clients? Because I know for me, it definitely takes a lot of education. Yes. So I'm just curious how you go about that.
No, it's a wonderful question. So I think it depends. Again, it depends on the client, of course. I find that as a male coach, I have to be particularly sensitive when I bring up or address the scale with my female clients because there's a lot more stigma in that space around weight. Women are kind of exposed to ideas of what they should or should not weigh from very early ages. So there's always a little bit of a battle there, which again, as a male coach, I'm trying to be as empathetic as possible. I'm trying to provide the education, like you said, of, weight is transient. It's going to change. Water can change how much you weigh. Sodium can change how much you weigh. Carbohydrate can change how much you weigh. The, variations of the menstrual cycle, depending on how long that cycle is or how big of an estrogen spike you get or how big of a progesterone spike you get on the back end, makes how every woman responds to their weight very variable. So I try to get people to understand it is data. It is a thing for us to look at from a zoomed out perspective so we can see the trend. Whatever you weighed one day to the next is a lot less important to me than what you weighed 1 week to the next or 1 month to the next. And so a lot of times you have to put that framework in advance. And so I'll even ask clients, when I'm going through the check-in process that I have, I'm like, we do have a portion of the check-in process where you can log your weight. It is encouraged, but if you're somebody who has an existing negative relationship with the scale, let's be sure that we're leveraging things like progress pictures, circumference measurements, that you're filling out your training logs so that we can gauge, some of the more objective progress you're making in the gym. What are the other areas that we could maybe gain momentum? Maybe sleep. So my check-in sheet always asks how they're sleeping, how they're hydrating. So even if you get a new client and their weight is pretty stable for the first month and they're like, well, I'm really frustrated about this because my weight didn't change as much as I wanted. You can go, well, look, the progress pictures are telling us something. The circumferences are telling us something. Look at how much stronger you got from week to week. Look how much stronger you got from the beginning of the block to the end of the block. And you're improving your sleep. So there, I like to make sure that the scale is used as a tool in that we don't put too much into it. Because we're chasing, are you getting stronger? Are you feeling better? Are your clothes fitting better? Are you doing better on the habits? If we do all that, the scale is going to do what we want it to do. But if we only focus on that scale, we're not going to allow that other cool stuff to happen. So keep it in perspective. That's one of the things I really try to hammer home with my clients. And how we address that oftentimes depends on what their relationship is with their weight the minute we start working together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just such an education piece to it as well. And just continuing to week after week, continue to remind them that the scale is just data. It's just a metric.
Totally.
Yeah. Have you ever, I'm just curious, something that I've experimented with a few clients recently actually is using the Bluetooth scales. And because for me, at least for my clients, I ask them to weigh it. If they're going to weigh in, if we're going to use the scale as a metric, right, we want to at least see some of the fluctuations and use that to kind of, have the data over the long term, right? It's not like the daily fluctuations that matter. But with the Bluetooth scale, what's cool about that is that you can put a piece of tape over the the number and actually step on it every single morning, and it logs your weight to whatever the app you're using. And then at the end of the week, you can see your weekly average, and you can see the fluctuations that happened without actually looking at without actually the scale being something that dictates how you go about your day, right? Because that's the last thing that we want.
I think that's phenomenal. I haven't thought of that. It's really creative. But I love it because we're asking oftentimes as coaches, human beings who have a very acute sensitivity to what they weigh because they're working on improving the way that they look. And we're saying every day, right when you wake up, go step on that scale. I want that shit to be the first thing that you send me or the first thing that you do. And they're every day they wake up, they're just oh man, this is going to set the trajectory for my whole day. And I think it's so easy to lose sight of that. And so I love that because not that I don't think we should try to convince people through education that, look, it's just data, calm down. But it is a really good tool for the people that might need a little more of a training wheels approach as you get going. So I love that. I might have to start doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, education is key, but even even for myself, right? I still I step on the scale every morning, and it's hard to just take it completely away. It's hard to take that emotional aspect away. And even with myself, even the most, like, I educate my clients on this every day, but I still get wrapped up in my own head sometimes. And I think that's it's completely normal, right? So it's just, again, it's just another tool that I found to be helpful for some clients. For some it is, for others it's not. But yeah, it all kind of just depends on where you're coming from. But
that's another thing too. If you can convey to your clients that you know how that feels, or that you have similar, a similar relationship with that, it's actually good to show that empathy, or to at least have lived it. Like, I come from a different perspective as being somebody who's always tried to get the number to go higher. And like, you're running into this wall. You're like, how many days am I going to be 189 pounds? Come on, hit 190. I ate like a absolute savage last night. I'm going to do it. And you step on 186. How is this possible? Like, where did it go? And that experience has made me more empathetic too, not just for people who are having a hard time putting on muscle, but again, like, that number used to piss me off. And so being able to connect with that and having actually felt it makes you a better coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So going back a little bit too, because I do want to address, just because you mentioned habits, you mentioned behavior change. I want to go back to that for a second. I know that you've said, and I kind of creeped on your Instagram a little bit over the past week. You put out great content, and there was one thing that you mentioned that resided with me, that fat loss is half science, half behavior. Did I say that right?
In that vein, yeah. It comes down to being a lot more about behavior than people think.
Yeah. So can we chat a bit about that and maybe give, some tips on what you feel like, what main changes in behavior do you feel like need to happen in order to sustain your results, like, over the long term?
Yeah. So I think I try to look at things with my content at the most population level possible. And I know it sounds like a little bit reductionist, because everybody in our space is so niche, and a lot of people, they really want to curate their content for bodybuilders who are interested in biomechanics, or powerlifters who are interested in this particular niche aspect of their sport. And I think that's phenomenal. A lot of the content that I'm making is, well, I should say, when I'm creating the content, I'm thinking about, okay, in America, we have about 350 million people, and about 70% of them are overweight. And that's a lot of people. That's over 200 million people. And I go, why do we have 200 million people who are overweight in a world where so many people know every single scientific underpinning of fat loss? If you go on Instagram, there's a coach telling you about a calorie deficit everywhere you swipe. And I completely acknowledge that you need a calorie deficit to lose fat. I love to talk about all the nuances of nutrition, the science part, right? Mm-hmm. And I think at some level, we lose people because science and scientific literacy is not a strong suit for most people. And so, saying to somebody, okay, the only way you're going to reliably lose adipose tissue from your body is by going into an energy deficit, at which point your body is going to shift its energy, its substrate utilization to more body fat coming from your actual cells. But to do it properly, you need a resistance train at least 3 times a week and eat as much protein as you can within 0.7 to 1 grams per pound of body weight. Do you hear me? And people are like, dude, I don't even work out. Is peanut butter protein? And so one of the ways that you can really help those 200 plus million people who have zero nutritional literacy is by focusing on behaviors. And I think at the population level, and for all of us, even those of us who are really serious, some of the behaviors that you can really focus on for body composition, staying lean, getting lean and staying lean. Get 3 to 4 protein servings spread evenly across your day that are between 25 to 40 grams, depending on the size of your body. That right there is going to keep muscle protein synthesis high. It's going to keep the thermic effect of food high. It's going to keep you satiated across the day, right? That's really important for a lot of people, is making sure that they stay full. And so that's a very simple behavior. I want you to eat 3 to 4 times a day. If you can eat more than that if you want, or less than that if you want, but try to make sure you have protein anchoring every meal. Can you get lots of cruciferous, fibrous fruits and vegetables in your diet? So you get enough fiber for your gut microbiome, so you get enough micronutrition for all the different cellular things going on, right? So asking people, focus on protein, focus on fruits and vegetables. Can you minimize your intake of fast foods and processed foods, right? Or alcohol consumption? Can you try to limit those behaviors or create friction around those behaviors? Can you get enough water? Can you try to drink about half of your weight in ounces of water a day? And can you get between 7 to 8 hours of sleep? That's like 5 things, 5 very reasonable things that you could ask people to keep an eye on. And my impression is that for where most people are at, that might be a little bit more helpful than the kind of little phony dialogue I gave about the deficit that a lot of trainers are hammering because they're so right. They're totally spot on, but they're way over people's heads. And so I think that better understanding some of those behavioral triggers, those behavioral opportunities that we can implement, like, hey, this is a really easy fix. You eat fast food 4 times a week. Stop doing that shit. Yeah. Hey, here's a really easy fix. Like, that's really helpful. And so I try to make sure that my content touches on those behaviors, because for most people, I think that that's where they're at. I think you get to macros and you get to that down the road, and that just the way most people are, if you give them too much up front, they'll struggle, and they'll think that their struggle is because they're not meant to be successful, or that, like they're very quick to self-sabotage when they hit a little bit of friction. So I try to, make as much of what we do behavioral. And then once you've done that long enough, those behaviors start to become habits. And once you have a few good habits in place, it's really hard to screw it up. Like, it sounds silly, but even if you didn't work out, if most of your meals were based around fibrous carbohydrate and protein, and you're not drinking calorie-rich beverages, you'll probably have no problem with maintaining a healthy body weight and healthy body composition with minimal to no resistance training. And so it's like, I'm not saying that that's optimal, but I'm saying that's like 2 habits that could keep you from falling into that 70% of Americans who are overweight.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a lot of people are, and I fall into this too sometimes. You just kind of want the next shiny thing, or like,
oh gosh,
that, and it's just like, I think it's kind of human nature. Like, we always want to have like something new or some like new goal or whatever it is. And I think that, a lot of people are chasing the, I always say like the saying, like, get the lower hanging fruit first and then obviously go to the top. A lot of people are starting at the top and trying to work and like working their way down. It's kind of opposite. So yeah, I completely agree.
Trying to get to the top of the tree immediately.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That kind of brings me to my next question too. Cause you mentioned resistance training, you mentioned, like you can lose weight if you don't work out, if you have your nutrition in check. But when it comes to specifically like changing your body composition. So I work with mostly women, and one of my biggest things is like resistance training, right? And lifting weights and building muscle as a woman, because that is where, the look that you're trying to get, the quote unquote toned look. I hate that word. We all do. That's not going to come from just, restricting calorie, restricting your food, right? So when it comes to like women and the women clients that you work with, what do you feel are the biggest mistakes that you see with your women clientele who come to you when they're looking to change their body composition?
Yeah. So the 2 most prevalent things are an over-reliance on aerobic exercise as a means to burn calories, meaning a lot of the women who come to me are frustrated that their body composition or weight isn't where they want it to be, despite doing a lot of cardio, and under-eating, particularly under-eating protein and carbohydrate. Under-eating dietary fat. I do get a lot of women who come to me with amenorrhea because they've been under-eating dietary fat so much they're not producing enough. They don't even have enough fat to produce the sex hormones that they need. But that's so much less common than I'll get a woman who's eating 50 carbs, or I'll get a woman who's eating 50 grams of protein. And so those misconceptions that, cardio is the best way to achieve your body composition goals, and that you have to be hyper restrictive with your diet, those are still very, very prevalent in our space. And I would say that most women who come to me fall into that trap.
I started out in the nutrition industry within the keto space, because I did a study on keto and that propelled me there. And so I kind of experimented with myself and worked with a lot of women in that regard. And my message now, and just from what I've seen and kind of been through myself and with other clients, it's, with a lot of the women that come to me, they're, really, really restricting carbs, and they just don't need to be. And they're not getting to where they need to be, or where they want to be by doing that. And so I think there's also there's a kind of a fear behind, and I feel like there's people in different camps, right? People are still super fat phobic, and then there's people who are still super carb phobic. Do you experience that at all with your clients?
Absolutely. And a lot of that depends on age. I find that women in their 30s to 40s tend to be more fat phobic, and women in their 20s to 30s tend to be more carb phobic. There was a huge push for low fat in the early 90s. And then we had the more recent low carb push in the late thousands, early teens. And so depending on where you were at when you were forming your nutritional identity as a human being, you've probably had plenty of demonization around those two. And so which one you decide not to eat, usually I find is somewhat correlated with when were you a teenager? Were you a teenager from 2005 to 2015, or were you a teenager from 1985 to 1995? Because that's going to really point me, it's not always perfect, but that's a consistency that I found. But with regards to women not eating enough carbohydrates because they're trying to maintain or achieve a certain level of body composition, I think to your point, it really hamstrings their goal, because one of the best things you can do to reach that body composition goal is resistance train. You want to preserve as much muscle as you can, because one of the big misconceptions we have in our space is that a calorie deficit drives fat loss, when in fact a calorie deficit drives all tissue loss, period. You're going to lose tissue. So that means that at some degree, you're probably going to lose a little bit of muscle. What can we do to build or hold on to as much of that as possible? Well, to help preserve it, we have, of course, dietary protein, which is extremely important. So you want to make sure that you're getting that. If body composition is your primary goal, the literature is pretty clear that we're looking for between 0.7 to 1 grams per pound of body weight. I don't know what that is in kilos for everybody who's not in America, but it's
me neither.
It's not an unreasonable amount of protein if you split it up across your day. Carbohydrates are really important too, because they're protein sparing. So a lot of people are like, well, what does that mean? It means that it actually helps you recover from the damage you do in the gym when you have carbohydrate, for a lot of different reasons. We've got things like IGF and insulin, but really what it comes down to is, if you think about it really simply, you need that protein to help build up, and those carbs really help you train hard and recover. So those are the things that you want to have in your diet. But another way that you can tell your body, put things in a terminology that I think people would understand, try not to lose any muscle or in this deficit, is by using that muscle. So applying mechanical tension to your body or lifting weights is going to send a signal to your body, I should preserve as much of this as I can, as opposed to an individual who is maybe on the same diet and only doing cardio. They would not be getting the same physiological stimulation to hold on to muscle tissue. So if your goal is that toned look, to use the word we all hate, but we all know what it means, that muscular, athletic female physique that a lot of people are after, the body fat is usually somewhere around 20%, maybe slightly lower, maybe slightly higher. You're going to want to be lifting weights for the majority of your exercise time. If you're exercising 4 hours a week, you should spend 75% of that time resistance training. I think that that's a rule of thumb I like to have for women. Unless you are training for an aerobic event, if you have a body composition goal, you should spend no less than 75% of your active training on anaerobic-based resistance training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like how you put that. I'm curious, what is your opinion on circuit style classes? So Orange Theory, CrossFit, things like that?
I don't hate it. I think it's important to acknowledge that we all have different entry points. And for some people, that might be a non-intimidating, community-based way to get involved with exercise. I like F45 a little more than Orange Theory because they have a little bit more weight training in there. And even though it's like, hey, do 45 seconds of bent over rows, fry out your low back, and then go into some plyometric exercise that you can't fucking do. I'm sorry for cussing.
No,
even though I'm not gonna like look at you and be like, oh, the programming is amazing, because it's not. We all know the pitfalls. I think if it gets you in the gym, it gets you acclimated with the culture of exercise and sweating, and my hope is that those people will then one day go, well, this isn't really working for me, maybe I need to try something else, and they'll stumble upon weightlifting. I think that they're still a net positive, even though it's really easy for us to hammer on them because they're so, from a scientific standpoint, their programming and approach is quite unscientific. But, I don't love them for weight loss whatsoever. And I don't love them for habit formation or long-term fitness. But I hope that in knowing that they bring so many people in, when they spit them out, those people find their way to the right type of training.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the biggest things with those types of classes, like you said, F45, and just like kind of your average CrossFit gym where it's, non-elite people just trying to get a good workout in. Like the community aspect of that is something that you can't get from like just going to a normal, Globo gym. And I was actually in that camp myself for a long time. And I was like, I'm never going back to a Globo gym because I would just be so bored. Literally, that's what I told myself. And that's why I kept, going back to CrossFit, even when I wasn't getting the results that I was trying to get. And eventually you kind of hit the point where you're like, okay, yeah, maybe I need to try something else.
Yeah, I'm tired and I'm hurt all the time.
Yeah. And then but then when you get into, I know at least from my experience going from CrossFit back to the Globo gym and actually having a program to follow that was, something that I would look forward to doing, and something that was written by someone else, so I didn't have to think about it, rather than just going in there and just kind of winging it and be like, oh, I'll do this today. That is where I feel like a lot of people get caught up, is that they just go to the gym without a plan, right? And you're just like, oh, I'll just do this machine, and maybe I'll pick up a barbell or a dumbbell or whatever. But it's not fun because you don't know what to do. You don't go in there with a plan. You don't go in there with your logbook from last week and try to beat your reps and sets and whatever it may be. But I think that's one of the biggest things. So when you can switch to that and then you start to get in the groove of that, it's like you're basically just competing against it sounds so whatever people say, you're competing against yourself, but it does actually become fun if you let it. So
yeah, and it drives one of the most fundamental requirements for physiological change, which is progressive stress or progressive overload. One of the bummers of these classes like F45, and one of the pitfalls of things like social media, is every time you go to F45 or Orange Theory, you're getting some random ass workout that doesn't make any sense. And maybe you're starting to be like, I guess it doesn't really matter what order we do things in as long as we're sweating. And then a lot of people, to your point, when they go to the gym, they've spent 30 minutes on their phone looking for a swipe workout to do. Mm-hmm. And it's like, all right, well, I'm not going to name names, but I was swiping through my Instagram, and I saw a very known fitness influencer with millions of followers who posted an entire shoulder workout that was one arm front raise, one arm lateral raise, one arm rear delt raise, one arm shoulder press, one arm upright row. And I was like, well, somebody's going to find this and go do a shoulder workout that takes twice as fucking long as it should because they're going to do it one side at a time. Yeah. But that's that person was like, yeah, this is sick. People are going to think this is cool because people are really I got to do something different every time I come in, don't I? And you're like, literally, no, you want to do a lot of the same shit long enough to actually get better at it. I know it's not sexy, but that's the whole point. And it's the same thing with nutrition. It's it's never what you're not doing yet. It's the stuff that you're not doing now.
Yeah, no, I love that. I couldn't have said any better. And that's the downfall. Social media, there's just like anything else, there's pros and cons. I think that's one of the biggest downfalls, especially with someone who is just, trying to get into it. So they're going to go follow accounts that are posting workouts, and then they're like, oh, okay, I'll just do that. But it's wait a second, you're going to waste the next year doing all these random workouts and then realize like, yeah, maybe you'll, and if they're, if it's a beginner, right, or someone who is new to train, like, yes, you're going to get some gains right off the bat. Like
you can accident your way to a ton of gains when you first get started.
Yeah, for sure. But eventually that's gonna kind of run out. So that actually brings me to our next topic. So for someone who is more, advanced, right? Someone who has been doing this for a little while and they're looking to optimize, training, nutrition, all that jazz. What are like your top recommendations when it comes to peri-workout nutrition? So this is a question I get a lot. So like pre-workout, potentially intra-workout and post-workout. We could start with pre-workout. Like what are your recommendations around that?
Yeah, so I do think it's important with nutrition if your goal is performance optimization and recovering to the best of your ability. I do think that we can use nutrient timing to our advantage. An idea that I've heard from a lot of people that makes a lot of sense to me mechanistically that I think is sensible and easy to implement. You want to have something before you train, unless you train super early in the morning and just getting up that much earlier to eat food is going to tank your sleep. But if you're training in the mid-morning to afternoon or evening, try to have something prior to training that has a little bit of carbohydrate and a little bit of protein. Ideally, if that carbohydrate can come from two sources, one being glucose dominant, the other being fructose dominant, your body being able to use different transporters to get that carbohydrate to tissue that might need it, that could be beneficial. So what does that actually look like? A whey shake with cereal and fruit on it, like have that 90 minutes before you train. As for supplementation peri-workout, some people like cyclic dextrin. Some people like essential amino acids. Some people like BCAAs. Those people are crazy. And I would say if you were wanting to just go to the absolute top of the mountain and be like, all my freaking bases are covered, I will be releasing 0 cortisol. I will have every amino acid possibly available in my circulating amino acid pool for me. Like there will not be a muscle fiber that does not have leucine freaking ready for it the minute my set is done. Like you could have cyclic dextrin and EAA while training. I think if you get the meal beforehand, you're fine. But some people are really about it and they're like, I'm not missing anything. You could include something like ALA, which might have insulin sensitizing impact. So you might take that stuff up better. You could include creatine because there are some studies that will show you creatine is a little bit, or the uptake is a little bit better around resistance training or with food. So like you might want to have that with your post-workout meal. I might not have it with my pre-workout meal if I'm having caffeine, because those two things could compete. So if I'm trying to use caffeine for like the ergogenic benefit and I'm having pre-workout, whatever, max pump 7,000 and you're just out here trying to get swole on as much caffeine as possible, maybe put the creatine in the intra-workout water or in the post-workout water, just get it in there, but put it towards the end and then have a meal after you eat. Like, I know it's old school. The anabolic window isn't real. It's like, yeah, okay, I get it. But it also never killed anybody to have a freaking post-workout meal. And so logically, if you're going to have 4 protein feedings a day, maybe don't have your post-workout protein feeding 8 hours after your workout. Just have it 1 to 3 hours after your workout. They're very simple steps that I think if you do some combination of what I just mentioned, you're going to be more than okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I feel like a lot of people, try to complicate a lot of these things. I mean, you broke it down very simply, and there is, different things that you can continue to optimize, right? The more you get, the more you advance. And the one thing though is that everybody, and I'm sure you agree with this, everybody's different. Like everybody responds differently to the different things that they're consuming. So some people might do really well, having a pre-workout meal or even a snack 30 minutes before. Some people, that same snack, even if it's something small, that could just completely derail them and they just don't like feeling anything in their stomach. So they do better, further out or fasted or whatever.
So true.
Yeah, sorry. Were you going to say something?
No, I said it's so true. Like, I think you're spot on. Like, it really just comes down to all of these things in the literature are optimal, but are they practical for you? And if they're not, and you're not doing them, then they're not optimal at all. Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like back to the supplements, like that, again, that is like the tip
top of the mountain, as you were explaining that.
Right.
But would you say, like, if you had to pick, if you had to pick 3 supplements that you think could actually make a difference, what would they be? For
a supplement hater, I'm not really a supplement hater, but for a guy who a lot of my content is, hey, do these behaviors before you max out your credit card at bodybuilding.com. Like, how about, let's be reasonable here. I love supplements. I love the science of supplementation. I love the ability to put the cherry on top. And I don't think they're all bad, but I would say that the 3 that I recommend the most frequently: creatine monohydrate. There is a tremendous amount of literature supporting its efficacy for driving performance outcomes. But there is an amazing amount of emerging research showing that it might be beneficial and neuroprotective. And with the very clear increase we're seeing in cognitive decline related, or I should say things related to long-term brain degeneration or cognitive decline, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, it might not be a bad idea for people who don't exercise to supplement with creatine, but it's a very good idea if you do exercise. It will help you perform better in the gym. I'm unaware of any negative implications of taking it long term. I think if you get plenty of fatty fish and red meat in your diet, you might not need it, but most people probably could supplement with it. I think that tends to be very safe. It's going to help you in the gym, and it might even help your brain health long term. Number 2 tends to be, for me, a fish oil. I do like, I shouldn't say a fish oil, an omega-3, because you can get omega-3 fatty acids from other places. So if you're vegan or vegetarian, or you just don't like fish burps, you might like an algae-based omega-3. But having something that you can supplement with that's going to help you spike your omega-3 fatty acids is going to help you keep that omega-3 to 6 ratio where you want it. And as far as health goes and performance goes and recovery goes and managing inflammation goes, everybody wants to talk about like turmeric and ginger and this and a tart cherry, and it's like, listen, are your omega-6s and omega-3s in the right range? Because let's start there. And the last one, from a practical standpoint, would be a protein powder. Like, look, if you've got to hit a certain amount of protein every day, if you have a protein powder as like the ace up your sleeve, you're like, oh, I'm 20 grams short. Boom. No, I'm not. Protein powder to the rescue. Like, that's so practical. That's so helpful. And I know those are like boring as hell, but those would be the 3 I'd pick.
No, I mean, that is definitely on my top list as well. I like to say, especially for creatine, like everybody and their mom should be taking creatine just based off of like, it's the most well-researched supplement for the last 20, 30 years.
Just everybody's mom is just jacked now.
Yeah. Right. But no, I love those. So I guess last question here for you. I know I'm just drilling you with questions. I guess that's what an interview is. So like for you personally, what is like an average day of nutrition and training look like?
So, so I would say right now I'm probably training 5 days a week. Sometimes I'll squeeze in a 6th training session, but that's almost always something aerobic exclusively. And so my training week usually consists of some combination of push and pull days and leg days sprinkled across whenever I can get them in. At this point, my schedule is pretty darn hectic. So like if I have an hour, I'm not doing legs. I'll wait until I have an hour and a half or 2 hours, but I might be able to flip a push day in there. And so I'm generally resistance training 5 days a week, doing a variation of a push-pull leg split so I can get 2 training sessions per muscle group inside of every 8 or 9 day stretch, training pretty darn hard, close to failure as I can for somebody who's not who trains by themselves. And I eat a lot of the same stuff every day, which really helps me out. Being somebody who tends to be pretty busy, like every morning for breakfast, I have oatmeal, a whey protein shake with some greens powder, and a serving of fruit. My lunch tends to be something very simple, like a sandwich with turkey, pastrami, mustard, like Ezekiel bread if I'm feeling extra fancy, sometimes not. Dinner is where I'll generally, being out here in California, I can basically barbecue all the time, all year round, but particularly in the summer, you'll see me fire up my smoker and I'll, make different types of proteins, whether it's, salmon on the smoker, or ribs on the smoker, or steak or chicken breast. I try to get a lot of variety in my protein sources for enjoyment. And then I fire up a ton of vegetables. So in the back half of my day, I tend to train earlier when I have more of my carbohydrates. And then in the back half of the day, when I'm not training as much, I'm eating a lot more protein. I try to eat more fruits and vegetables, and I still eat a number of carbohydrates, and I'll still snack on things like a normal human being, like cereal or chips. But, my day is basically anchored by 3 meals: a breakfast that's always the same, a dinner that's almost always a ton of protein, a ton of veggies, and like something like sweet potatoes or rice or any carbohydrate that I really enjoy. And then that middle meal is something fast. But that's really practical, and it works for me, and it helps me get 5 lifts a week in, which I feel really good about.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, that just speaks to the simplicity side of it, and like really just finding foods that you enjoy. I mean, I've been eating the same breakfast every single day unless I'm traveling for like the last 3 years. And
it
people,
helps.
And people get bent out, or bent up. I don't even know the same. Bent up.
Bent out of shape.
Bent out of shape. Yeah, there you go. They're like, oh, you have to, change up your food all the time to get the different micronutrients and all that stuff. And that's true. Like there's some degree of truth there. Like if you're literally eating the same exact thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like every single day, like 365 days a year, like you probably need a little bit of variety, but you can still eat the same thing pretty much for breakfast and, get a little bit more variety in the different...
Yeah, I'll figure it out not at 5 a.m., okay?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think just that's also like when I have clients who are struggling with like their meal plans or just staying consistent day to day, it's like, all right, let's find 1 or 2 meals for, breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you can just put on repeat for the next few weeks. That has been like the probably one of the biggest things that's made it so much easier for someone to be consistent. It's just like eat the same thing and then, if you don't like that, okay, let's find something that you like and put it on repeat. Cause I promise you, like I said, I've been eating the same breakfast for the past 3 years, but that's a little bit of a lie, because I've gone through periods of maybe not eating breakfast sometimes in the last 3 years, like a little fasting and stuff like that. But in general, we're talking general here.
I got you. I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Like find something that you enjoy and that you like literally look forward to eating and put it on repeat until you don't enjoy it anymore, and then switch it up. I mean,
and minimize distraction and decision fatigue of, I often will paint this meme for my clients. Like when people open the door and they're like, the refrigerator, and they're like leaning into it, looking for what to eat. And they're like, oh, what do you want to eat? I don't know. What do you want to eat? There's nothing in here. Do you want to get tacos? Yeah, let's go get tacos. And then, you're out of the house and you're off to get a dinner at a restaurant. That's a very real, like nightly thing for most people, when it could be, instead of what do you want for dinner? It's like, hey, dinner will be ready in 5 minutes because it's already positioned in the refrigerator. So when I open it, it's staring me in the face. It's already prepared, or it's already cut up and ready to go. And minimizing friction and minimizing the amount of decisions you have to make. And by having, like you said, 1 or 2 locked in meals, the way most people operate, that really reduces the risk of deviating from the eating behaviors you need to have to, in many cases, change your body composition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I do have one last question that just popped up before we finish up. So in terms of like, at least for my clients, I do utilize, and for myself, utilize calorie cycling sometimes, in the sense of, especially for lifestyle clients who like to go out and, go to restaurants and stuff on weekends, but they still have, some goals in terms of body composition. And they feel that, getting things, putting things on repeat Monday through Friday is just super easy. Like we're busy at work. We don't want to think about it. Do you implement any type of calorie cycling, like a 5-2 split or anything like that with your clients?
You definitely can. Again, it depends on the client, and it oftentimes depends on the situation. So if it's like a client who's said, I consistently want to eat more on the weekends, then a 5-2 split is really, really smart, especially if they're like, I'm just so busy at work. I have no problem eating 1,600 calories Monday through Friday, but I can have 2,500 on the weekends and still be in a deficit. Be like, yeah, if that's conducive to your schedule, perfect. If you're like, hey, I've got a barbecue coming up and I really don't want to limit my behavior and it's just one day, what do I do? I mean, there's so many ways you can attack that with that client. Maybe you're like, when's the barbecue? 3:00. Okay, cool. Have a protein shake, do a protein sparing modified fast for 12 hours, get to the barbecue, fucking kick ass, do whatever you want. I don't care. You can really play with it. And I think as a trainer, the more tools you have in your tool bag, the more people you've worked with, the more times you've misapplied the 5-2 when you should have done the PSMF, or you should have done, like, hey, I'm going to give you a refeed here because we've been in a long deficit and you need 2 days at, maintenance calories, but you got to get it from carbs. There are a lot of different ways to apply calorie cycling techniques. It all depends on the client. One thing I'll do for women, depending on how sensitive they are to the hormone fluctuations of their menstrual cycle, is in the follicular phase, women tend to be able to tolerate carbohydrates really well and train a little harder because of that estrogen surge. So during the follicular phase, if a girl's like in her check-in, she goes, oh, I just was feeling crappy the last week. I was on my period and I just got off. I'm feeling great. I'm ready to train. I might be like, cool, throw some extra carbs in there this week and see how you feel. So that's a form of calorie cycling too. I'm all for it. I think it just depends on what's practical.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. I think it's just finding what works for the client and, having that time to figure that out too, and realizing that like sometimes we are we're testing and guessing and testing, whatever, you know what I mean? And sometimes it takes time to figure that out, right? Like what works for you. Some people, do fine on, a linear intake, and others are like, keep blowing it out over the weekend. It's like, all right, well, let's implement a strategy here. Let's like actually find a strategy that works for you and fits into your lifestyle rather than trying to fit your lifestyle into some strategy. And I think that's something that a lot of people are missing when they're just scrolling social media. And maybe if they don't work with the coach, not saying that everybody has to work with the coach, but if you don't have that kind of outside perspective and you don't have those tools and those strategies, like you're doing yourself a disservice, because these things could make a huge difference and work for your lifestyle.
Totally. And the unfortunate truth is a lot of people just don't have enough scientific literacy, or they don't have enough, God, it sounds elitist, but it's like if you're scrolling on your phone, you are probably going to see a lot more misinformation related to your health and fitness than you are quality information. And with the general level of understanding people here in America have about the mechanisms that drive body composition, they're going to make a lot of really bad choices when left to their own devices. And you oftentimes have to be like, well, I tried keto and intermittent fasting and this and that, and none of them really worked for me. And it was like, okay, well, do you want to try a really reasonable approach to food where you kind of get to eat everything, but you just have to pay a little bit of attention to how much of it? Okay, yeah, I'll try that. It's like, yeah, you should have started there, but I get it. That's not what you're going to see when you open Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram. You're probably going to see sensationalized things, and it feeds people's confirmation bias. It can't be that simple. I can't be that simple. I've had a hard time with this. I've got to be complicated. This is what's wrong with me. I need this because it's my insulin, or it's my hormones, or it's the time of day that I'm eating. And it really feeds into the unfortunate misconception that people have. And I think weight loss is hard to do emotionally and from an application standpoint, but scientifically, it's pretty fucking simple. And once people finally get that, then they're often freed of the chains of the health misinformation space that is out there.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about being just like, not being so complicated about things, and, trying to address the less shiny stuff first before you.
Yeah. And I love the complicated stuff. I really do. Like, you probably could tell at some points in our conversation today that I'm like holding myself back from going down a rabbit hole about a supplement or about some type of physiological mechanism. And I think that that's really awesome for coaches to talk about on podcasts. But I always wonder when I'm on the internet, I'm thinking to myself, how much of this content that coaches are producing is over people's heads foods, or it's just made for other coaches. And if it's made for other coaches, hopefully they're distilling that and disseminating that to their clients. But for, the majority of people out there, the simpler and the more approachable you can make something, the more likely they are to take it and run with it.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. And I also think the education side of it too, like if people the more you can educate them once they're kind of in your circle,
Totally. Yes.
that is huge too. Cause there is, and this is something that I have an issue with just being in the space with keto and metabolic flexibility, and it's kind of emerging. It's just like, there's so much misinformation that's just like circulated, and people just don't understand it, or they hear it from their friend or something like that.
Of course.
And that's kind of like one of the biggest things that I'm trying to do is just like, let's take this and at least give you some education behind what this is and what's going on, so that you can at least understand it from like a practical standpoint, not just a physiological or scientific standpoint. So
yeah, the YouTube PhD that everybody thinks they have. Listen, I watched like 3 YouTube videos. I basically know everything about human metabolism.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So my very last question for you, is there anything that you've changed your mind about in the last year, and why?
Oh gosh. Okay. There are probably a number of things, and I would say that something that I have become extremely receptive to in the last 2 weeks, and it does kind of tie nicely into what we talked about today, and that is that it is very hard to change people's behavior or help people change their behavior or inspire people to change their behavior by shaming them, or by trying to make them feel stupid, or by trying to make yourself look smarter. And we've seen that here in America on the political level, on the public health level, on the nutritional science and the training level. It's everywhere. And I grapple with it as somebody who wants to be right and wants to be like, no, you're wrong, I'm right. And you're so wrong, I need to let you know you're wrong by making you feel stupid or telling you something that you're wrong and dunking on you. And so something that I used to do earlier in my career as a younger person in the space who was, I've always been one of the younger coaches out there because I got into this at such an early age. And this is a gate-kept industry full of a bunch of dudes who are just jacked up on testosterone, and everybody thinks they're the best. And you have to pay your dues, and you have to, take your lumps. And one of the things that I really acknowledged was like, okay, well, when people make me feel bad about the times I've been wrong, I kind of turn into a defensive asshole. And so maybe if when I'm interfacing with somebody who's wrong on the internet, or who's, misguided or just getting started, if I can make sure that I do, no matter how tired I am, no matter how underslept I am, no matter how frustrated I am, just try to be empathetic. Try to communicate in a way that, promotes receptivity and doesn't shut people down. And I used to think that helped. I used to really think that you just had to tell them how it is, just that person's being an idiot, shit on them. And I'd be like, yeah, that makes me feel good. And I was like, I don't think I've ever changed anyone's mind doing that. And so just something I've changed my mind about, I guess, the longest answer of all time. Is that the best way that you can probably inspire whatever change you're trying to create in life, in other people, is by just being kind and generally being less abrasive and not thinking that you need to win every interaction that you have.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And it's just don't be an asshole, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I think it's just, and like you said, like it's so common to see that, especially on social media, especially in the nutrition and fitness space, because especially with nutrition, like there's just so many different zealots and camps, and it's like
religion.
Yeah. And it's sorry.
It's religion. It becomes religion to people. Like, if you're shitting on my diet, like this is a literal crusade. I will fight to the death for this. And my tribe is coming. Like there is a literal tribe of men, mostly men, who only eat animal products. And they were like, I'm convinced that the carnivore diet was born of dudes on the internet who were getting sick of being yelled at by vegans when they posted like a picture of their awesome medium rare ribeye. They were like, look at my awesome ribeye. And somebody was like, you are a murderer. And they were like, I'm sick of these people. Let's team up and make our own diet. You know, like, I'm like, that, I literally think that's how that started. And so nutrition is super volatile. And sometimes you just have to be like, all right, dude, you do you, because I am not changing your mind on this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's just like, you know, being in this space for a while, and especially like, I will for sure say, like, I came from that keto, you know, keto is amazing because I went through it myself and I took clients through it. And then as I learned and as I experimented and developed and learned more and whatever, I realized like, okay, I was wrong about that. So let's kind of like find some balance here, and and that's the thing too, like, just, you know, being able to admit that you're wrong about things and being able to, you know, continue to grow. And I probably am wrong about something that I said yesterday, but that's not like, that's okay. Right. It's not. Yeah.
I don't know who said this, but there's a quote that gets thrown around a lot that I like, which is, I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right. I don't know who said that, so I'd love to attribute that quote, but it wasn't me. But, you know, I think we're all afraid of being wrong. And to your point, I've been wrong about a lot of shit because I kind of, as is the case with many of us, to certain degrees, we're all self-taught. And we've all amalgamated information from different authorities who have conflicting viewpoints. And it's not uncommon for somebody to be like, no, you're so wrong. And then you go like, oh my God, I feel horrible. I was wrong. Like, I'm a bad human being. But the truth is, just being able to admit that you were wrong instead of turning into this voracious, pretentious asshole is a skill. And it's part of whatever the hell we're here to figure out in some way. Like, it's really powerful when you get to that place where you're like, I'm allowed to evolve in the way that I view the world. So anybody who's telling me I'm wrong, so long as I'm open to evolving beyond that, like, they're only helping me. And if they want to tell me in a way that's rude, then I'm sorry that you know, your life sucks and that you have to be mean to people on the internet.
Absolutely. Awesome. Cool. Well, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. Do you want to tell everybody where they can find you, your website, social media, all that jazz?
Yeah. Well, now okay. So I almost gave the old website because I just changed everything over. So if you guys want to follow me on anything, the easiest way to do it is to just go on Instagram, go to Danny.Matranga. That's my username. And everything kind of just flows out of the Instagram. So my podcast is there. That's the Dynamic Dialogue podcast. My coaching company's there. That's Core Coaching Method. And I'm on there with my various tweets and takes and semi-educational stuff that I'm putting out there. So you can definitely follow me there. I'd go to the Instagram.
Okay, awesome. I will link all of those in the show notes so people can check them out.
Cool. Thank you.
Sweet. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, I will talk to you soon. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of MetFlex and Chill. I hope you enjoyed it. It would be awesome if you could give the show 5 stars and leave a review on iTunes. We're trying to get placed in the top 100 health podcasts, and the 5-star ratings and reviews are what can help make that happen. I'll add step-by-step directions for leaving a review in the show notes. I know it's a big ask, but it really helps. Thanks again. See you next time.